Hi, everybody. I am Branden Sewell. I am the owner of Seal Pro Painting located in Central Florida. I'm also the host of the Off the Ladder podcast, and we exist to help home service business owners learn so that they can lead well and ultimately live life off of the ladder. Today's guest is he's been a guest before on episode 36, Branden Lazar. In the last episode, we covered Ninja VA. He is the founder of Hourly IQ and Ninja VA. So, welcome to the podcast again, Branden.
Brandon, thanks so much for having me back. I'm amped and pumped to get to it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, it's a pleasure to have you again. I follow you on social media and I see all that you're doing, and you're creating a lot of value for the home service business space and industry. So, really quick, just for those who may not have heard episode 36, could you just give a brief overview of your experience as a business owner who now is creating these amazing softwares for home service business owners?
Yeah, would be happy to. So for 15 years, I had an exterior cleaning business. So started in my first year of college. It was a borrowed mom's minivan and a couple ladders and some magnet decals, and we were in business. And fast forward 15 years later, decade and a half, we were in three different locations, and we would go from two technicians in February to 32 technicians by May. And that was like our standard trajectory. We were not just seasonal, we were hyper seasonal. And
Mm-hmm.
then rewind 2 years ago, coming on 2 years already, I actually sold that business in a seven-figure exit. So since then, now I've had the opportunity to really refocus my time and energy into providing solutions for the pain points that I really experienced while I was trying to grow and scale my own business.
Yeah, that's really good. And there's just really quick before we get into our hourly IQ and that software. I think there's a lot of value in what you just mentioned that I'd like to recap for the listeners. I think a lot of home service business owners, maybe they get into business because they hate their corporate career, or maybe they got laid off or fired, and they're like, I just got to do something. And then next thing you know, they're starting this home service business, and could be painting like myself, or exterior washing like you, or lawn care, whatever it is. But then they're in the throes of like running a business, trying to figure it out, and they don't really know what's next. And something that I've always known from the beginning when I started this business is I'm starting it with the intention of two things. One, either one day handing it down to my kids, or second, selling it, and having an exit that way. So there's always like I'm always keeping in mind, how do I build this business to have an exit strategy or a legacy attached to it. So I'm just curious, just because I think this is such an amazing accomplishment, to have said that you built and sold a business. Could you walk through for the listeners, and you don't have to go too in depth, but what are some of like the things that you did to create value and make a business that could be sold? And I think a lot of one question that a lot of people probably ask is like, it could I even sell my business? Am I building something that somebody would want to buy? And could you just dive into that really quick so that people could hear your experience with that?
Yeah, I think it's all about creating a situation where there's like enterprise value. We don't want just like the golden handcuffs where the systems revolve around you. And although you make a lot of money, it's essentially a job. Like it requires your involvement, right? So I
Right.
think high level, that's what we always need to be pushing and aspiring towards. And I like you mentioning that like this is always in the back of your mind, because I do think it should guide us and it should dictate all of our movements throughout the day, the week, the month, and
Hmm.
ultimately trying to figure out a system where your business is in a box and there's a limited amount of skill and discretion that's required, right? It's the McDonald's model. It can basically function with the inputs of 15 to 18 year olds running the thing,
Hmm.
and ultimately then you don't have to pay a lot for your inputs, and it's scalable, and you don't need like these super high caliber, high experience individuals. And I think as soon as you can get to that point, not only does it have better enterprise value for a potential purchaser in the future, but it's also a lot more pleasant to run, and
Right.
it doesn't require you every step of the way.
Yeah. And that's really the heart of like me starting this podcast is I wanted, as it's called, the Off the Ladder podcast. I really want the people who are listening to this to understand why they're in business, understand that greater purpose of, not just creating a job for yourself, but like I said, creating a legacy, having an exit strategy, and building something where they're like, oh, wow, like I could actually sell this thing one day. And so I think it's great that you're actually now a part of building those systems that people need to implement so that they can get to that place where it doesn't require them in the day to day. And so, anyway, with all of that said, let's jump into hourly IQ. What is it, and how is it going to help serve home service business owners?
Yeah. So hourly IQ, after going through this decade and a half of realizing like there's some crucial systems and spreadsheets, and you got to run these specific reports, but also realizing the fact that a lot of the makers of the CRMs that are in our industry, while they're powerful, they haven't walked in our shoes before. They don't know our pain points or our struggles specifically. And ultimately, what hourly IQ is it's a set of what I call smart tools and dashboards that plug directly into your CRM, and they give you the information that you require in order to run your business in a very clear and simple way.
That's really good. And I think, many business owners are going to probably find themselves in the same shoes that I am, which is that I hate the numbers. It's like one of those things where it's the most detrimental things to your business, the data, understanding the numbers, being able to look at those spreadsheets and really be able to forecast and make strategic decisions. And, that's just one of the things that I do not like, especially if I'm having to, looking at the data could be fun, right? To say, like, okay, here it all is. And now let's dream and vision what this, looks like going forward based on this data. But actually getting the data, right, I think is the thing that a lot of us don't like, where it's like, well, I don't want to jump into my CRM and export all of this data and create an Excel spreadsheet and then put formulas in and try and get all of this information out. And so it sounds like what you've created is something that kind of automates that process and gives you the data automatically. Is that right?
100%. Am I able to do a screen share here?
I think you should be able to. Let's give it a try. I
Okay,
think you should be able to hit share down there and share your screen.
cool. Yeah,
Perfect.
so
Yeah.
I'm going to narrate everything just in case there's just audio only listeners here. But effectively, this is what the system is. So it breaks your business into 4 different departments: production, customers, executive, and sales. And inside of each one of these, we have these smart tools built out. So it's as a matter of just clicking in. And then, one of the things we really struggle with in my business, because we did 2,500 jobs a year, is we needed to know where we had capacity and where we could book jobs essentially. And that's what
Hmm.
this does. It tells you how full each day is. It kind of tapers off and summarizes the end of each week. And it tells you in like a very actionable item type approach how many more jobs you need in order to fill your capacity. So this is just like
Nice.
one example of the smart tools that are built out that, again, they plug directly into your CRM. Right now we API with Jobber specifically and House Call Pro in the very near future. And
Nice.
it just takes the legwork out of this. I used to have somebody go through manually in the busy time 3 times per day and try and tally up and count up how much we had booked for each day. Whereas now it just ports in automatically.
That's awesome. Now, are you going to go over the other areas as well, or?
Yeah, definitely. Like what we've found is there's a lot of spreadsheets that we were manually contriving, creating, pulling the CSVs from our CRM and then having to re-upload it. And then it's out of date before you know it. Whereas if you build out the software, it's just so much more streamlined. It's always up to date. And
Hmm.
it does, like to your point, it does the legwork. You don't have to, create the cells and create the formulas and break a cell formula and whatever else. It just gives you what you need. So it's way more simplified. And I think most importantly, it gives you actionable data. So,
Hmm.
another example of this is one thing that we always were very accustomed to tracking was our goals. So for this example, basically you set a goal value for the month and it's going to
Hmm.
track how much you produced and how much you booked in the calendar. And from
Hmm.
there, it'll tell you how much more of a gap you have to fill in order to smash your goal. So
Awesome.
again, it's just very simple stuff that, when it's presented to you, you can just grab it and go, right? Whereas if you had to create this from scratch, it's a bit of a headache.
Yeah, that's really good. And so for the for those of you who may not be able to see this and you're just listening, some of the other things that it's telling you is like based on your goal, what pace you're going to need per day. So like what you're going to need to sell per day to hit that goal. How much you are behind pace and jobs needed based on your average ticket size. And so I love this. I mean, this is like, I go in and I've got to like sit down in my office, run the numbers, and then I actually do this on like a whiteboard. But to be able to just be able to go in here and have all of that automatically in there would be amazing. And like, just simplify that. And I'm assuming you would be able to give access to like a sales team to be able to see this as well. So you could tell, your sales team like, hey, you're behind this much. We need to make up this much ground and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. We've actually been working on some really cool dashboards as well. And so the whole idea then is we want to kind of share in the journey. This is the mock-ups that are being worked on right now for the dashboards that this hourly IQ will present to the users.
Hmm.
So again, this will be on the big screen in your office, and it's always up to date, and it's fun, it's engaging, but it gives you what you need, and it's not too heavy, right?
Great. So
These numbers
if
are,
you
yeah, go
if
ahead.
you could really quick just break down this screen, like what all are we looking at here? I see we just kind of walk through. You got year to
Yeah.
date sales at the top.
Yeah. And I should preface, I've conducted over 1,000 coaching calls with small business entrepreneurs, home service
Hmm.
entrepreneurs. I did that for 3 years. And really, what this is doing is it's taking my experience having built a very streamlined and efficient service business myself, as well as conducting all those coaching calls to realize what's important and how do we display it in a very approachable manner. So, what
Hmm.
you're seeing here would be cast on a smart device or a TV in your office. And ultimately, it's a way for you to very easily keep tabs on these very important KPIs, key performance
Hmm.
indicators. So at the top, we have year to date sales, our year to date goal as of today. And then that'll give you your gap. That'll tell you if you're on or off course to meeting your goal. And if so, by how much. And then it has a fun readout to just tell you how many jobs you completed. A little bit of dopamine there. It feels good.
Hmm.
After that, we're going to just keep tabs on your average job size as well as your close rate. And one of the other cool metrics that we can pull out of the source data from Jobber is we can tell you how long is your customer lifecycle taking at various points in the customer lifecycle. So for this example, from going from a quote to fully paid, we're averaging 17 days. And from here, quotes to getting paid, we're maybe averaging, a different time period. Obviously, this is just kind of dummy data at this point, but we can really
Hmm.
articulate where's the bottleneck, where's the pinch point in your service offering.
Yeah.
And past that, we get into bookings here. So, kind of this week, next week, and the week after, how fuller is our capacity? How much bookings do we have in the schedule? And then it really just ties into, again, that monthly goal and trying to close in on that gap.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And when you're a smaller business, when you're not off the ladder yet, these numbers may not be as important, right? you're out there, you're working on the truck, whatever, you're going and doing all the work. But what I can say is somebody who is off the ladder and has been for 8 years, it's and as you grow, it's even more important that you have a grasp on these numbers and the data, especially when you're talking about making a payroll for let's say 8 to 10 people. And you have to be on top of these things and be able to go to like your team and say, hey, we got to tighten up and get jobs done faster, and be able to show the data and explain why. Or go to your sales guy and say, hey, we're not converting high enough, we need to get our conversion rate up to let's say 45%, 50%, and we need our average ticket size to get a little bit bigger. What add-ons can we be offering, and stuff like that? Because it's just, man, it's a lot, especially when you have a team and you gotta keep everybody busy and make sure everybody's getting paid. And unfortunately, you don't have the ability to just get slothful, or not pay attention to these things. So I think it is a challenge, though, for business owners, right? I think it's not easy, but I think it's great that you're making something that's like simplifying it and making it fun. So, can you talk a little bit about? Go
Just to
ahead.
double click on that, yeah, I would say too, like your mention of how important this stuff is. Like the reality is, these numbers are happening in the background, whether you care or are able to see them or not. Like it doesn't matter; they're
Yeah,
still there, and they could be
yeah,
bad numbers. Maybe we're heading in the wrong direction. So it'd be best to get that available to you as quickly as possible so that you can be aware and then maybe change course. And
yeah.
that's in part what this is doing as well. It's almost like a little bit of an insurance program as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's better to be in a position where you can see what's happening. The faster you can see what the data is telling you, the faster you can get on it. Like, I mean, just in reality, like we had a bad week last week for sales, and so I'm looking at all the data and I'm telling my sales guy, like, look, we've got our conversion rate dropped like 14%. We've got to sell. And then I'm going to him and I'm saying, hey, what can we work on with your sales process? And we're going over a sales process. Are you doing this? Are you doing that? How can we get this conversion rate up? Are you offering, upselling? Are you just going out there and saying, hey, what do you want? And then offering them that? Or are you looking for additional things to offer based on your expertise? And so I think, but you don't know those things, right? You don't know that you've got to put the foot on the gas and, you know, add some, just hustle, on certain weeks, right? And push hard. Like I told my sales guy, this weekend, I said, we've got to have, this is what we have to do this week, right? At minimum. And we're going to have to hustle and push. And these are the things we're going to have to do and tighten up. And so, but you don't know that you have to do that if you don't look at the data, right?
Yeah.
You could be, and then let's say if I didn't see that, if I wasn't looking at my conversion rate and I wasn't looking at where sales were and all of these things, I could get to the end of this week and it turn into a bigger mess than it has to be, right? But looking at these numbers enables you to be proactive to get after it. So I'm just curious. Like I love that you're creating these softwares. I love that the value that it's going to bring to home service business owners. What I'd like to do is kind of take it back to like the whole building a business that is sellable. Can you talk to the listeners just from your own experience? Like, what were some of your disciplines, your practices, your systems, and things that you had in place to grow a business that could sell for 7 figures? And I think there's a lot that you could unpack there, and I'm sure you can bring it back to hourly IQ. But I mean, when you talk about how many, you said you were hyper seasonal, how many guys did you say you went from and then added each season?
2 to 32 out in the field, 15 work vans.
So like, that's just like incredible to me, like to think, so obviously one of the challenges of growing a business is hiring, right? Like you've got to learn how to hire, you've got to have those systems and processes in place. So I'd love for you maybe to like unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe you could even unpack, obviously you said you had 15 vans.
Yeah,
Yeah,
spread
so
across 3 locations.
yeah, so maybe even talking a little bit about that, because I think these are questions that you've got people who are listening to this, and maybe right now they just got like a van and like a couple helpers, or maybe they've got like two crews and they're running one of them, and they're thinking, "Man, how do I get to the place where I can hire and onboard people, and how in the world am I going to buy more vehicles and where does that money come from?" If you could just unpack that a little bit for people, and help them understand, like, what does that look like? And I'm sure I think you would say it doesn't happen all at once, right? It's a process and it takes time. But if you could just unpack that a little bit, I think it would be helpful.
I love that you pointed that out because I feel like we live in a culture now where it's like we're looking for things like immediately. And
Sure.
not only in business do you have to be on the right track, but you have to like sustain that right track for potentially like years and years or even a decade, even when you got it right, you know? And
Hmm.
I think that's important to just like, I feel like Alex Hormozy does such a good job of trying to communicate the grit tolerance requirement, right? It's
Hmm.
even if you're on the right track, you gotta keep going and you gotta keep pushing, and it doesn't just land on your lap, especially in the home service industry. I would say at the end of the day, you have time and you have energy to put into your business. So it quickly becomes an equation. And I love, the concept of your podcast. Like, where are you focusing that time and energy? Because if it
Hmm.
is moving stuff, i.e., a paintbrush, a power washing wand, or a window cleaning squeegee, if that's all you're doing, well, fair market value of that is, I don't know, depending where you're located, $20 an hour, right? So you can't
Right.
expect great, amazing things. Not only that, your opportunity cost, what you're saying no to is like all the high value and important stuff. So it's
Hmm.
imperfect by nature, but I think we want to make little strides to get to that point where even if it's, on Fridays, you book yourself off and you're not on the ladder that day, you're doing CEO type work or you're doing hiring or you're doing training. Like
Hmm.
doing it at all is better than not at all. And it's imperfect by nature. It just is, but you got to take the little wins as you go. I would say the other part is you look back on that transaction that I experienced, they bought my way of doing things and all the systems that I created. And they loved my dashboards and they loved my employee handbook and they loved our training wall facility that I created. And again,
Hmm.
those are all just like little systems of their own, but I figured out the root issue. And then again, with limited skill and discretion coming in from outside of the industry, they were able to continue on and continue running that operation. So
Yeah.
I would say that's really what retains the value is the systems you create, and I think also showing that like you have a consistent lead flow, good revenues that don't like take a sudden dip or anything like that. But
Hmm.
ultimately, those are the two things that they're buying.
Yeah. And I think to get there, you have to change your mindset. I know that's definitely been true for me. My mindset has been one of my biggest focuses. And I remember early on in my business, I mean, I've pretty much been off the ladder the entire time that I've owned my own business. But there's been like seasons where like maybe we go through like a hard time and I'm like, oh, the answer is for me to go do a job myself, or if an issue comes up, it's like, oh, I need to go handle that. And as tempting as it may seem, that's not the right decision. It's like this week I was like, okay, we had a rough week last week. There's this, I ended up I had this referral come in. I sold the job the same day. It was like a softball, it was a really great referral. Didn't even have to go to the home to bid it. I bid it all virtually, sent over the quote. Here's your deposit. Let's get it done. I'm like, oh, this is a really easy job. I could probably knock this out in a couple days. I'll just go do it myself. And it's like, and then I had to remind myself that's not the right call, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes as small business owners too, um, we forget how much value there is in us not doing those things, and how valuable our time is spent focusing on more important things. Like, in this like week that we're in, my time is much better spent, putting the foot on the gas to drive more business in. To like, how could I sell 10 jobs this week? How can I bring in more revenue? How can I get more leads in? How can I focus on the marketing and all of those things, tightening up production? So I think that we also have to realize, like, I think, people think like, oh man, like once you become the person who's off the ladder, like, what do you do? Like, there's a ton of stuff that you can do. It's just whether you're doing it, right?
And I also like to point out, like, not only is it higher value activity, so instead of the $20 an hour technician type work that you're focusing on, maybe going to bag that sales job, maybe you were making $500 an hour, or maybe even $1,000 an hour effectively, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I like to point out though is, now as we're graduating and we're putting a higher value on our time, what that also means though is now we got to like wait a little while for that to come full circle. So like medium and long term, those types of initiatives tend to pay off, whereas the short term solution would have been, yeah, you go strap on the coveralls, you go get the job done, you get the check in the bank, and it's done, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we got to be focused as leaders and CEOs of our own company on the medium and long term horizon, not just the short term.
Yeah, for sure. And I think sometimes that's difficult. One of my favorite, you may have heard of him, but one of my favorite guys to listen to is Tommy Mello. Um, he built A1 garage doors, and obviously sold it recently for a lot of money. And but he talks about in his podcast that many times how he was he really saw the long term, right, of investing in his business, right, living in a small apartment when he could have probably lived a grander life, or driving the same truck when he probably could have bought something else. So but he had this mindset of like, I'm going to invest in my business for the long term. And obviously it paid off. He sold his business and made millions, right? So I think for us as business owners, like you said, we need to have that long-term mindset. And it's not just, he put it into perspective on this one episode where he said, like, would you rather make 3 million in income over the course of, let's say, 30 years, or would you rather make a little less like income, take home pay over the course of 3 to 5 years, and then sell for 3 million in 3 to 5 years, and you just collapse that time frame? But by like delaying your gratification, instead of paying yourself $150,000, you paid yourself, $50,000 to $60,000, but you invested into the things that we're talking about, the systems, the processes, getting off the ladder, making a business that doesn't require you in it, and making something sellable that somebody wants, because they can come in and just basically say, okay, I'm the new owner. I'm going to make, $50,000, $60,000 passive income, and I don't know if you would necessarily call it passive, but it's not requiring a lot of time and dedication to run something. And so when you reinvest in it, and then you can turn around and say like, hey, I'm selling this thing, you can come in, here's the playbook, here's how it works, and hand it over, and it just operates. You've built something valuable that can sell, and you can collapse that time frame to make that money. So I love how Tommy Mello explains that. And
I love the
I
delayed gratification too, and that's so hard to do, especially once you're already spike and you're at those higher income levels. To
mhm.
regress back is really challenging. So if you're not there, going
Yeah.
into this and just keeping a modest lifestyle rather, and reinvesting back into your business is crucial.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to guys who have been really successful, sold businesses, and that's oftentimes what I hear them say is like, if you can find out what that, obviously, I'm not saying like live, a terrible life and, live in poverty, right? Or, be miserable or something, but like I live a very comfortable life. I have a nice house and we have nice things, but um, if I were to insert myself into the business more, I could probably double my income, but then I would be losing my time, right? And I'd be extending how much time it would take for me to build a business that is able to sell. Whereas my main focus is how do I get my time back, delegate as much as I possibly can, create the systems and the processes, create the leaders within my business, and make it to where it doesn't require me so that, one, I'm getting my time back. And two, if at any point I wanted to say, hey, I want to sell this thing, I can't. So, um,
That and what I really like to practice too is like I love the delayed gratification. I also love Robert Kiyosaki's idea in that like your operating company should be at least a portion, the purpose of it should be in order to fund other investments. And
right.
that's something that I mean, that's a separate podcast altogether potentially, but that's something I took very seriously as well. And reinvesting the proceeds from my exterior cleaning business into a commercial real estate portfolio that now spits off, a sizable amount of passive income monthly. Like
Right.
now we're talking fulfilled life pretty quickly.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen you talk a little bit about that in through social media and stuff, but um I would like to talk about that a little bit if you don't mind, just because I think what uh there's a gap, I think, between where people are, where they want to be, and what they think is possible and they look at it from like time frame, effort, financials, like what does it take to get there? It's like I'm here and I want to be here, but what does that actually look like? And so I think like that you have that experience. So if you were able to just share like, hey, this is what that looked like for me and this is what the time frame looked like, I think that would be helpful for those who are listening to
Yeah.
get a grasp of the reality of it.
Yeah, and like this stuff only works if your business and your house is in order, right? Because if you have
Right.
nothing left at the end of it, or if you don't know what you have at the end of it, so it kind of ties into the root of how we started the conversation, right?
Hmm.
If you're fortunate enough to run a profitable business and you have money to reinvest profits at the end of the year, it's a great way to keep your crews busy in order to buy what I did. It was like more of like a fixer upper real estate project
Hmm.
and then ultimately strive to get it rehabbed and then leased or rented back out. And now you're all of a sudden talking about like a new stream of cash flow. Not
Hmm.
only did it keep my crew engaged in the quiet season and on payroll and momentum still high, but
Hmm.
that separate cash flow is a great way to diversify, and ultimately that could become a thing of its own, and it
Right.
provides that layer of insulation that like no matter what happens with my operating business, I still got this whole other thing that potentially could, make ends meet. So
Yeah.
that's turned out to be a really cool thing for myself.
Yeah. I think that's, one of the things that I realized, it's funny, you look back and I think in some situations in life and you're like, wow, I could have done that so much sooner. One, if I would have just taken action, right? And
Hmm.
two, if I would have had the knowledge that I have now. So, like, I'll use a prime example. When I was, I don't know, I think I was 23, 24, I was starting my business. Um, and I had a bunch of money saved up, and I was moving from Baltimore, Maryland to Florida. And to, I took all this money and I was kind of fearful. So what I did is I actually paid for months and months in advance in rent. And, uh, when I look back, I'm like, now that I know what I know now, that was a dumb decision. I could have taken that money and bought a house. But I didn't know what I didn't know, and I was young and I was fearful. And so I just did what was like, just common, And so I think, that's what I mean is like some people, they hear all of this talk about like, hey, you could, invest in real estate, or, you could get into house flipping, or, hey, make these investments into, mutual funds or whatever. There's all of this stuff, but some people, they hold back because they fear what they don't know, right? And so I think the other side of that too is like you have to be willing to make mistakes. So maybe you don't know everything, but just getting started. So I say all that to ask, like, what did it look like for you to get started, and to actually take action? Because I think some people are just like, well, I get what you're saying, do this, but what does that look like? Like, how much money do some people? I was sitting on enough money to buy my first house and I didn't know it. Do you know what
Sure.
I mean?
$100%.
Some people just don't know what that looks like,
And I like that concept, success leaves clues. I would
Hmm.
say also the proviso here is be careful what you read in these Facebook groups because everybody
Sure.
is a keyboard guru. And you really want to go to a person that you aspire to achieve what they've done and then reverse engineer, or like I said, success leaves clues, right?
Hmm.
I would say with respect to the real estate side, I would look at what is your business need now or potentially in the future. For us, it
Hmm.
was like a small office space and we needed a yard to store all of our work vehicles.
Hmm.
So, you being your own potential tenant is like the safest bet you could possibly make. So if you start there, you're not really going out on a limb in terms of like buying a property and then rehabbing it, investing in it, and then all of a sudden nobody shows up to lease it or to rent it, right?
Hmm.
In that scenario, you're the person and you really just offset one of your future costs or potentially one of your current costs. And that was our case is we were leasing an office space and it came for sale. We bought it, cleaned it up, and then rented out the other side. So it's a very gentle way to kind of get your feet wet.
Hmm.
And I can recall though, like I get how, that rolls off the tongue all easily, but like
Yeah.
looking back on it, it was like I was trembling. I
Yeah.
talked to the property manager who fast forward years later, he actually became one of my tenants because I kept buying up these units. So now he's actually one of my tenants. But
Hmm.
in that moment, I was fearful. I didn't know if I think it was, a modest amount of money. And
Hmm.
I was really apprehensive and I didn't know how to look at it. But once you start to get in on it, then you start to develop that ability and that appetite and that that willingness to kind of look through a deal and have the
Yeah.
confidence to go right through.
Yeah. There's back when I was in my early 20s, I had been following this, you've probably heard, well, I don't know. I'll say that you've probably heard of them, but Bigger Pockets. Have you heard of Bigger Pockets?
David
Um
Green, yes, sir.
yeah, David Green, and I think Branden, another
Turner.
Branden Turner. Yeah, so I listened to Bigger Pockets, and actually, like, that's what ended up encouraging me to end up buying my first house. And but as I listened to that podcast and listened to everything that they shared, I was like, man, I could have bought my house, a couple years earlier, um, and with and in a better way, honestly. But anyway, I think that it's really important what you're talking about. I mean, and it just goes back to that whole point of like legacy. Like, what's the point of building these businesses or generating this income. Like you want to create something that's going to have longevity and a legacy and give you your time back. And I think it's just thinking differently. And I think you're probably where I want to be at some point, and I think I'm trying to get there. So it's cool to be able to just have the conversation with you and hear how you're achieving that. Another question that I have, this kind of goes back to the hourly IQ. So you make your exit from your business. Did you use a lot of the funds from your exit to fund these future ventures, like the software, and obviously you did the real estate, but was that how all of these got started?
Exactly. And I think it's also important to like always be looking for like what I call off ramps. If you're grinding and fighting the good fight and you're making it happen and your business is fortunately spinning off some profits, I think you owe it to yourself to be trying out different things with those funds. It's almost
Hmm.
like responsible gambling. And I look back on my journey and like, man, we started a painting business of our own. We started a mobile detailing business. We started new locations. And like each one of those were kind of like mini bets of sorts. And
Hmm.
we started a software business. And, so we got our feet wet and we didn't have to like fully halt or like hit the brakes on the one core initiative. It was funding everything else. So when
Right.
you get to that point, you get to that diversification and you just never know what else is out there. I think
Yeah.
home services is challenging and it's tricky and it's a great way to start things out and it can still really progress, but
Yeah.
ultimately there's a lot of other ways we can make money as well in this world.
Yeah. That's really good. I last year I purchased a pressure washing and paver sealing company. So
Nice.
my buddy was selling it, and I ended up buying it from him. So last year, we got into pressure washing and paver sealing, and what I can say is it wasn't like this huge, like turned into like a whole nother business in and of itself, but it paired really well with the painting. Right, we're already there working on people's homes, and so we were able to find those jobs, pressure washing or paver sealing. And I would say that we last year was the first year that we set a revenue goal and we actually surpassed it. So, like
Okay.
every year before, we would set a goal and we would maybe just come shy. But last year was the first year where we set that goal and we went over it, and so that felt like really good. And but I don't think we would have hit it if we wouldn't have purchased that business. That brought in a lot of additional revenue that otherwise we wouldn't have made. And so even this year, we're looking at. I have a meeting tomorrow, and we're really going to be diving into like how do we take this to the next level this year. And so that's going to be our focus is how can we take this business and add an extra 200 300,000 into our revenue. And so just diversifying in that way and adding this service is it's a game changer. So it's funny, like I'm constantly thinking as a business owner, like what can we do to grow and add and diversify. So I think it's really cool that that's something you're already doing.
Well, and to your point, like I love the creativity that was showcased there, right? Like, yeah, we can just stay in kind of the trench and we can go get more leads and close those leads and then get more jobs on the schedule. Or like there's some really fast ways where you can bump up that top line revenue, i.e., start a new location,
Hmm.
offer new services, buy out some competition that's
Yeah.
struggling or wants out anyways. Like those are just money on top right away. And it comes
Hmm.
without a lot of risk. And the other beautiful part about it is you experience what are called economies of scale. So you've
Hmm.
already set up yourself with like a bunch of fixed costs, i.e., maybe you got an admin person or a VA. Maybe you got a phone system, maybe you got a CRM, maybe you got a yard space. Now all of a sudden you can do a lot more revenue with those same fixed expenses that you're already paying out. So what that means is the money you do make from those side initiatives will ultimately be just more profitable.
Yeah, and I talk to my my sales guy about this often, and I say there's only two ways we can really move the needle forward, and that's either to bring in more business and sell more, right? So
Mhm.
we're bringing in more leads and selling more at the average ticket that we're at, and just increase that, or we can increase our average ticket, right? So if we can accomplish more with what we're already bringing in, like how great is that? You know, we can increase our average job size. We can upsell these additional services that we're offering. And so we can take, you know, maybe a $7,000 job and turn it into a 10, 11, $12,000 job. So I look back at some of the jobs that we were able to add to our schedule last year, and I'm like, wow. And the other thing too is customers love when you have like all of these different services that you offer, because then they can just go through like that one person. And I like to, I have this one guy I was talking to who's way younger than me. He's younger than even I was when I started my business. I was 23 or 24, and he's like 21 right now, and he was asking me about adding additional services to his business. I was like, well, and he brought up this one that was like completely like uh separate from the services that he offered now, like not even the same industry, like two separate industries. And but I said to him, I was like, why don't you think about adding on services that complement what you're already doing? So he does window washing. I was like, why don't you add on like gutter cleaning and roof washes and pressure washing exterior houses and paver sealing, and like those are all like encompassing the exterior. Grow that and do those things, and then maybe do like he wanted to do it was like something to do with electrical. But I was like, just, you know, if you can increase, you know, you're already there on the ladder cleaning this window, if you can clean the gutter out while you're right there and add on some revenue, why not do that? So um but
I like that
anyway,
point that you're bringing up too. Like, I feel like all of us in the home services are in the game of convenience. That's what we're selling. We're selling convenience. And
mhm,
if we can make it easier for Mrs. Smith to check these things off of her list, and she already knows, likes, and trusts you, then to your point, they're going to be really excited to learn that you actually offer different services of which they require as well.
right. So let's kind of transition the conversation. What's next for you? What's you know, if you could talk to the you know, the listeners about some of your future endeavors. I think it's interesting to talk to you, because obviously we have like, we may have people listening here who aren't off the ladder yet. Right, and maybe they're trying to transition into being off the ladder, and then maybe there's listeners who are off the ladder and they're trying to think like, okay, well, what is next? And then once I get there, what is the next thing? And so I think you've accomplished some of these things. So I think it would be interesting to hear, like, what do you do if you build a business and you sell it? Okay, you start these software companies. Well, what's next? What do you do next?
Yeah, and like, I'm a business person that's doing home services, and then now
Hmm.
business person that's providing solutions to home services, based on my experience. So, these three are at very different points, and I'm pointing
Hmm.
to kind of the softwares and the solutions that we're currently operating. So Ninja VA grew very quickly, to the
Hmm.
point where we're actually we're incorporated in two different countries now. We're an international brand, which is really cool. And
Awesome.
it's starting to get to that maturity phase. I have an operator, who I basically have given the keys of the business to, and I don't work in that business anymore.
Hmm.
And so that one's at a very different place than like what we're talking about today with Hourly IQ, where we're set to launch here the 13th of the coming month. So
Hmm.
we're 2 weeks away from launching on like a very open level, where we
Yeah.
have alpha and beta testers right now. So I like to always have that kind of healthy rotation of new ventures coming through that I'm focusing on. And I think when you're an entrepreneur doing it in that way, it's almost like they're your baby, and you got to be very hands on with them in the early days. You have to develop the systems, the workflow, really figure out what your product market fit is and articulate what that message is to your user, your avatar. And then slowly you can start to release it and let it just go off into the wild and do its thing for you. And
Hmm.
hopefully, like was the case with Ninja VA, like we're out to help 1,000 entrepreneurs each save 1,000 hours of time. Like 1,000,000 hours of impact is what that company is set to do.
Hmm.
So your impact interval and ways you can positively affect the world continue to improve. And I think that's what it's all about. That's the beauty of capitalism, is if you see a millionaire or a billionaire or whatever, like it's a matter of scale and depth of the solutions that they provided to the world, and they reap the rewards as a result of that.
Yeah. If you could, let the listeners into what does it look like for you to like invest in yourself, and what kind of things do you do to cultivate the mindset and just the knowledge that it takes to go from, you ran a home service business owner, you sold it, you started these software companies, and now you've stepped out of one and that's running. I think for me, when I think of one of the most limiting factors for people, is I think one of the most limiting factors is mindset, and I don't necessarily know that, and you could probably speak to this better, but I think a lot of people, um, they do a discredit to themselves and they don't realize, like, sometimes the difference between one person succeeding and another is not necessarily whether they were more talented or more skilled or the smartest person in the room, but it was change of mindset and realizing what's possible, and just understanding maybe some key things in business and leadership that it takes to like to grow something. Could you speak to that and maybe bring to light, like, how do you get to that place?
Yeah, and I think reflecting back on it, it's a giant numbers game too, right? Like even like successful and seasoned entrepreneurs, like they're not right all the time, right? So you need
Hmm.
those chances at bat, and you got to take some swings, particularly when you're young and you have very little potential downside, even if things crash and burn. And I think you
Hmm.
can do that also in a very efficient manner where you're maybe assessing in like a minimum viable product approach. You're assessing what the demand will be if I even do this. Go sell the thing before you invest in buying the trucks and the wraps and buying the storefront and whatever else, right? So you can go about it in a pretty savvy way. I
Hmm.
also think there's a huge amount of value to be had for mentorship. People that have just done the next thing that you want to accomplish, like you're going to get less skinned knees and bruised elbows, and you're going to get there a lot quicker if you're just following the course of somebody that's already done it versus
Hmm.
trying to fumble around in the dark looking for the light switch. You don't know what way's up. And yeah, if you're tenacious and you have grit and you're resourceful, you'll probably find the door eventually. But man, why not just turn on the lights and reach out to somebody that's already done it?
Yeah, that's really good. I've had a few coaches along the way and kind of like work through different programs and stuff, and I can definitely say like that was a game changer for my business. Um, do you have any thoughts or tips on finding a mentor and finding a coach or a program, and what's a best fit and things like that?
I would say look at what you're trying to get out of that relationship. And on that basis, would you trade places with them?
Hmm.
Right. And I also think the other thing to consider too is, are you looking for somebody that's more like an accountability partner? Or are
Hmm.
you looking for somebody to just like on a more of a like drill sergeant type basis, spell out what the next steps are, and then they just dump it on your plate and you're expected to go do it on your own? Everyone's
Right.
personality type and wiring is different, but I think
Hmm.
getting clear on those two things I think is pretty important. And again, just be very careful. Like I've seen those threads on Facebook, man, where they're like, "Hey, I'm looking for a coach," and 85 people are all of a sudden coaches.
Yeah.
And it's really quick and easy to do this, but have they actually walked the walk?
Yeah, yeah, that's really good. Another thing that I would say is in picking someone that you have to work with as a coach, you want to be very clear about what you want, right? What you want to accomplish, because if your coach is trying to get you to, like, let's say this point, but you want to go over here, it's not gonna help. And so I think alignment of even just values, I think, is important, right? So I think you have some people who want different things, and so and find value in different things. And so if you're working with somebody who's trying to take you in a direction, it's obvious you're gonna fight against that coach or that mentor, opposed to coming alongside them and wanting to do the things that they're saying, because you're going to have like this internal fight of like, hey, you're trying to take me here, but I really don't want to go there. So I think it's really important to know yourself and be self-aware. And I think that that can be a challenge in trying to find a coach, because they could be providing advice or telling you things that don't really align with what you want. So I think it's very important to try and focus on finding that.
Yeah, and like at the end of the day, a lot of business comes down to expectation management, and that would be a good
Hmm.
example again, right? Like if we're at A and you want to get to B, like a good coach should be able to articulate on that and then reverse engineer a path backwards, which they can
Hmm.
help you adhere to. And if they're not even having that conversation, then where is B? We don't know. Is it growing for growth's sake? Is it time freedom? Is it, you know, being allowed to focus on other things and different businesses to start to diversify? Like they don't know if they don't have that conversation.
Yeah, yeah, that's important. I think for me, when like I said, I've had a few coaches over the years, and I think I've just found like some coaches, like there's not really flexibility in their program or their approach, and so you just have to be able to identify that, because some people are just like, hey, this is how I do things. This is what, and that might be the only value they can bring to you, right? If you're trying to go in one direction, and they may not be able to help you get there or know how to help you get there. So but I 100% like am a huge advocate for coaching. And I think kind of bring this back to hourly IQ. I think like you have to, in order for these things to work, like you have to be humble. You have to take a humble approach and say, like, man, I don't know everything. I don't have a grasp on everything. I can't run this just by feeling. I can't just coast through this and get to where I want to be, or just outsell my stupidity. It's like you have to humble yourself and say, hey, I've got to work on this. I need to implement these things and look at these things and get a better grasp on where I'm heading. And I think it's a great thing that you're creating, so that these small business owners and home service business owners can take um, that opportunity to look at these things and really just better themselves in their businesses, because um, it's what you have to do if you want to go to that next level. And um, I tell you what, there's some hard-headed people out there, stubborn people who are just like, I mean,
Yeah.
I could talk to people about getting off the ladder and what it takes quite often, and there's just some stubborn, hard-headed people who
Their
don't want to.
situation is different though, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we're not that interesting. At 30,000 feet, we're all a bunch of specks of dust that move stuff for people, and we get money in exchange for doing that. And
Hmm.
we're in the game of convenience. And I think what Hourly IQ does a good job of is it really uh, takes a very like overwhelming experience and
Yeah.
articulates what you should be focusing on. And then it presents your information as to like how your business is doing on that thing. So it's
Yeah.
really like it's two part. It's not just giving you all the information because like a CRM could do that, but it's like
Hmm.
what part should you be focusing on in order to get to the next level is really what it's all about.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. And I think it's just like I said, for me, even just when I apply it to myself, I go back to like I don't like numbers, and one of the reasons I don't is because of the complicated part of it. And so to have something simple, just put it right in my face is like, hey, why not use something like this? So, really quick, I'm going to try to bring this to a close. If somebody was interested in connecting with you or finding out more information about Hourly IQ or Ninja VA or the other software that you have, what would be some of the best ways for people to go about that and getting your
Yeah.
service?
Yeah. So I have a personal brand website. So it's brandenlazar.com, LAZAR.com, brandenlazar.com with an ON. From there, I have a link to all of the projects that I'm currently working on. And if you're interested in Hourly IQ specifically, if you go to hourlyiq.com/group, that'll get you into the Facebook group. And again, we're right around the corner from a public launch here. We're aiming for February the 12th of 2025. And
Awesome.
it's going to be awesome. We've got some alpha testers that have shown a lot of promise in what we're creating, and they've also provided a lot of insight as to how we can improve it. And we're ready to let the world see it and try it, and hopefully help a lot of people to eventually get to where they want to go with their business.
Awesome. And I think you mentioned that one of the main CRMs that you're going to be working with from the beginning is going to be Jobber. So for those who are listening and are currently Jobber users, what is that interface going to look like for them, and how is it going to kind of work in hand with Jobber?
Yeah. So we're already in the Jobber App Store.
Okay.
And really, all you got to do when you sign up is you connect your Jobber account. And then in 5 to 15 minutes, you'll get an email saying, hey, you can log in and see your capacity chart. We pulled all the future visits, all the future clients, all the information for you. And then after that, we're going to do a full pull of your Jobber database. So we're going to go
Hmm.
back in time. We're going to pull all the clients, all the invoices, all the payments, like everything. And that's the
Hmm.
raw data that basically we feed off of in order to create these smart tools. So that usually
Awesome.
takes about 10 to 12 hours, depending on the size of your business. And then you'll again get another email saying, hey, your account is fully set up and ready to go. And from
Awesome.
there, all the smart tools populate. When we do our initial soft launch on the 12th, basically those smart tools are coming to fruition as we speak here. So every week we're dropping one or two new ones as they get developed. But that's
Hmm.
honestly the easy part now compared to building out like the framework of the entire system. So it's going to
Sure.
advance really quickly. And if people want to be along for the initial ride, they'll get a good discount and hopefully be one of the early adopters.
Awesome. Do you want to talk really quick about pricing, or are there different levels or tiers to the software? Do you want to talk about that at
Yeah.
all?
So the beauty is this software obviously can be trialed. So if the user just puts in OTL as a discount or a referral code when they're signing up, we'll make sure that they get a really good 3 month discount on that trial.
Okay. Awesome.
On the spot here, like $40 for 3 months of use. Um,
Okay.
after after that, we have a plan that's just the capacity chart and monthly goals for as low as like $30 a month. Or if you want to go to like the full on, like this thing calculates sales commissions, it does like a coaching module, it has the service map, it's like everything you need. That one's coming in at
Awesome.
149. So
Okay.
trying to make
Awesome.
it really approachable here, but also like this is like you get this stuff right. These are the numbers with actionable information as to what to do with those numbers. Like your business can transform quite easily thereafter.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Brandon, I really appreciate your time. And for those who are listening, I think you would do a disservice to yourself if you don't connect with Brandon, see the projects that he's working on. I know for me, as a small business owner and entrepreneur, it's encouraging. It's awesome to see somebody, doing the things that you're doing. And I'll definitely be looking into Hourly IQ for myself, and seeing what all it has to offer. We've been really looking for something along these lines for a while. And so I think that it's awesome that you're creating it. Um, I'm definitely over going into my office and writing on a whiteboard and doing all the calculations myself. So it would be cool if we can have this just up on a big TV and just always have it there. It gets me excited even just thinking about like my team being able to go in and seeing like, hey, this is where we're at, and seeing that live. So that's really awesome. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Off the Ladder podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video, comment, share your feedback, share it with somebody else. And then, as always, turn on the notifications and subscribe to the channel. If you're watching on Apple or listening on Apple or listening on Spotify, please rate and review the show so that we can reach more people and get this podcast out to more small home service business owners and help them get off the ladder. And we will see you next time on the next episode of the Off the Ladder podcast.